What's the story you tell yourself that allows you to be with different sorts of people and be okay with it?
There are always things that are going to be different from how we understand or how we see it to be. But I think what's helpful for me is to be curious about those differences. I think that's what makes it for me, that I'm not just focusing on the similarities or commonalities. Those are definitely important. But I kind of just want to understand the difference. I just want to, find out more. And I think a part of that comes from the story of seeing how those differences and diversity can be beautiful in its own way. I think the commonalities I see are the shared need for connection, for authenticity, for relationship, the shared challenges of being isolated, of loneliness, right? Of navigating the different, difficult sometimes emotions and feelings we have. And, this idea, I think, about what's the end, right? We talked about what's at the end of life. This idea about how it all goes back to loving and being loved. I think that's always a commonality that we fall back on. Right? If we look at sometimes the mind-boggling family conflicts that we see often in the people we work with in our communities, and sometimes people, in our team discussions go, unimaginable, this kind of conflict. How does it come from? And then slowly, with the understanding of time and the relationship, then we start to see actually a lot of these conflicts come from a place of love. It is just love that had difficulty in being communicated. I like to call it sort of love that couldn't find its way home. And so we have all these differences. We have many commonalities, but at the end of the day, I think if we go back to the desire to love and to be loved, I think that helps me to navigate these differences too.
I'm sitting with what you just said about how, as you see the tensions and the brokenness in the communities that you work with, what you're seeing it as is love that cannot find its way home. Could you unpack that for us? What does that mean to you?
I think what it means to me is that the starting point of a lot of people comes from that good place.
What is that good place?
That good place of caring about someone, loving someone, or wanting to be cared for and wanting to be loved, right? The problem is sometimes how we communicate it, how we express it, how we respond to it, and how we behave, right? The kind of choices and the kind of behavior that manifests out of that desire to care and to love. And what we then want to focus on a lot more is not the unreasonable manifestations, the difficult behaviors, but going back to the intention.
I'm wondering how this sits with a recent definition of love that I've really been mulling over. There is a guy who looks a lot at societal change called Adam Kahane, and he's got this book called Power and Love, A Theory of Social Change. And his definition of love is unity of the separated. And I'm wondering, when you hear that definition, what does that evoke for you? Like, how does that sit with you? Love is unity of the separated.
Yeah, wow, that's an amazing definition.
Right, it's a great definition,
so much to unpack
right?
from it. Yeah, so much to unpack from it. And where do you start, right? I think where I'll immediately respond to and start from is that love is the unity of the separated, right? The separated refers to, I guess, in the context of our conversation, the differences that separate us, the different identities, the different labels, the different beliefs, how we communicate differently, how we act for each other differently. All these things are things that potentially can separate us. But I think then, to me, what love is to sort of go beyond it, not just to overcome it. Sometimes it's negotiating, sometimes it's compromising. So you don't always resolve those differences or these things that could potentially separate or divide us. whether is it at home or in communities or even in a larger societal context. But in seeing that in spite of these divisions and separations and differences, how we can still come together and say that we still care for each other as people, as persons, as human beings, that despite all these differences and separations, we can still have a relationship, friendship, family, kinship, or otherwise.
Do you see your work in trying to bring together the whole or to meet these people, these communities, wherever they are? Do you see your work as coming from a place of love?
Yeah, I think that has to be the foundation of it. I don't think it can continue in its way because it's relational work and it's emotional work. And I think that is what sustains it. That's what allows it to continue. And I think the important thing is to I don't think an important way that we think about work is not to solve problems only. Not to see something that is broken or damaged and say we've now got to fix it. Not to see the separations and say, we must find different ways to bring you back together. Right? I think that's possibly hopeful. That's possibly ideal, maybe to me, but I don't know if that's what you want. So I think it's also hearing and learning that sometimes that's not what people want. They don't want to fix it.
Sometimes people criticize, let's say, our approach with looking after the elderly or looking after the migrant workers or looking after people with mental health issues as, they would use words like, it's very broken the way we deal with these issues, or it's very unloving, this system, and I'm seeing how that it's maybe brokenness or unlovingness. We're trying to describe how it looks like when we deal with the issue in this very fragmented way rather than trying to look after the whole.
Because the boundaries are so clearly delineated, the scope is so clearly defined, and there's this party and that party and that party. It just feels like very comprehensive machinery and system that sees you as a unit of work to be completed, but doesn't see you for who you are as a person. Right? So on theory, on paper, the design sort of looks great because you have all these different things covering different parts. But have we asked the person whether this works for them? Whether this is what they would need? And I think that is the experience that we start from. And these days on the ground, what we have a lot is we need more coordinated work. We need more coordination. We need more integrated services and integrated care, right? If you look at any social services thing, coordination and integrated services are all over the place. But we have to then take a step backwards to ask, why do we need all this coordination and integration to begin with? How did it first started out to be so fragmented? And whether the patches of coordination and integration can really get at the heart of the fragmentation, because it looks like what often happens is we have coordination on top of coordination on top of coordination, a never-ending cycle of coordination. I think that's why that community-based approach is important to us. I think that's why we don't go to think about getting funding, because we fear, and I think we have a reasonable experience to have this fear that once you start taking money from most places, you start getting that pressure and that effect of needing to define, have a clear boundary, have a clear scope, and you start becoming that fragmentation. You start being fragmented in that way. So in some ways, we continue our work as a voluntary model for many reasons, but one reason is that it's kind of like a test case to see what happens when you have a different approach like that. What happens when you have a community-based approach, which don't see people as unit of works, which don't fragment people into different issues, and then person A come in to solve that issue and person B come in to solve that issue. I think that sort of having specialized services is not a bad thing. It's necessary. People are good at what they do and they come in to do their respective parts. And the community members we work with appreciate that. But I think what we have learned they appreciate more and they need more is a one coherent group that will be there with them throughout the time, that knows them as a person